Hello, everybody. How are you? I hope everyone is doing okay. I am doing okay. So, tonight we are going to be talking about how childhood trauma or childhood experiences have or can impact your adult experiences. So we're going to talk about tonight. So I hope that you guys are ready to have a conversation, because I am. If you can, tell me who's in the chat. Tell me who's in the chat. Who's up here tonight? Who's up here tonight? Who's ready to have a conversation? Conversation. I didn't put any music on tonight because last week I kept getting these little dings that said something about copyright. And I was like, I don't have no time for that. So I decided I wasn't going to do any music tonight. And let me know if the camera here is a little better, because I got a new camera, guys, and I think I like it. I think it's a little bit better. I still got some work to do, but I definitely think that this camera is a little better than the one off my actual what do you call it, computer. So, but anywho, so let's start. So it's your girl, Dr. Tasha Rose, your transparent sister in women's healing. And I am the owner of Let's Talk About It Counseling Services in Bloomfield, Connecticut. And welcome to Healing Unlocked CT. We are here to talk about like our regular inspiring stories that really connect with individuals on all types of I would say like journeys, right? So it's not really therapy, but it is an opportunity to share stories, to share how you overcame things. And we're not here to judge, but we are here to share. We're here to heal. We're here to learn. We're here to do all the things. So welcome, welcome, welcome. This is episode 11, y'all. I am so excited about the fact that this is episode 11. And yes, things are still, I'm still working on things. I'm still trying to get things in order. But God told me to continue, and I'm going to continue until I'm able to feel like I am where I'm supposed to be. So each and every time I get on, I'm so grateful for people who show up. So thank you for those who show up, those who are on a consistent basis, and you guys show up for me. I'm super excited and I'm grateful. So thank you so much. Again, this is episode 11, and this is right after the Resurrection Sunday, which makes it even more spectacular, because when God does things in our lives, we have to be honored by the fact that He died for us, y'all. So we need to be obedient. We need to walk in the way that we're supposed to be walking, because He died for us. And so yesterday was just a beautiful, beautiful time. And then, all last week, Holy Week, things was just happening. And I was just so grateful to be in the presence of the Lord. So I am so grateful. So anywho, so welcome, welcome, welcome. So tonight, again, we're going to be talking about how childhood experiences can impact your adult experiences. Why is that important? That's important because sometimes we be out here doing too much, y'all. and we complain about our children doing things, but then we got to think about why our children behave in the way that they're behaving. A lot of times they're behaving that way because that's how, that's what they see. That's what they grow up with, so you can't expect a child to grow up a certain way and not be rude or disrespectful, or not to be timid, or not to feel like, oh, I need all the attention on me, or sometimes, little narcissists, right? We cannot act as if this just came out of the womb. They did not come out the womb like that. They did not. So tonight we're going to be talking about something that is that helps shape us, and that's really how how our language is shaped, how our behaviors are shaped. We're going to be talking a little bit about attachment. We're going to be talking a little bit about adverse childhood experiences. We're going to be talking about things that are important to why we behave the way that we behave, and if we don't get the right assistance, what happens, right? I know for me, there's so many different things that I've done in my past and behaviors that I had. And I know that it was because of either the environment or just family dynamics. So sometimes we just do things because that's what we're used to, like gossip, right? Judgment, being being selfish. Like sometimes these things are just things that we were taught, or sometimes you've been taught how to be a pleaser, or somebody, you've been taught how to be what they call, sometimes they say like a Georgia peach or something like that. And it's like sometimes these little things that we're brought up doing as women and men, sometimes it's really not a positive, and it can really impact our lives as adults, because sometimes we, as we grow older, we might become resentful and different things like that. So today that's what we're going to be talking about. So pitch in, chime in, chime in. I'm going to be just going over a little bit of that psychology stuff that I do. And then we're going to just really just talk about different things and different behaviors that we have gone through. So please do not be afraid to put something in the chat, because you guys know I'm going to read it and we're going to dissect it. So we want to talk a little bit about attachment theory. So we know that the attachment theory is how we bond. It's how we bond with our caregivers, and how it shapes on how we connect in our adult relationships. So that is really about attachment theory, right? So we know that attachment theory has been around for a long time, but they broke it down. I'm going to talk about three. That's going to be secure attachment, anxious attachment, and avoidant attachment, right? So the reason why those things are important is because as we start talking about different things, you're going to be able to maybe identify if you have some of those things going on, right? So we know that secure attachment is pretty much, it's supposed to be the healthy one, right? Healthy communication, you got some trust, right? Then we have anxious attachment, which is fear of abandonment, overthinking. And then we have avoidant attachment, which is emotional distance and shutting down. So there are so many of us that might have all three, or we feel we have all three. Some people might just have anxious, some people might have avoidant, but at the end of the day, these things come from how we bond with our caregivers and other people around us as we're young people. All right. So if you had inconsistent love as a child, more than likely you may over attach or constantly seek reassurance in relationships, right? We know that. We talked about that, I think, like in my second session here, when we were in second episode, we talked a little bit about that. So when you think about individuals who are now in relationships, rather it's friendships or intimateships, or even just work, like some people are workaholics, because we want to feel like, oh my gosh, like I'm doing a good job. And that can cause a little bit of anxious attachment, right? So those are some of the things that we want to make sure that we're paying attention to as we're raising our children, right? And then I want you to pay attention to some of the things that you've gone through as a young adult or a child, right? So when we think about our attachment style, what do you guys think you are? Because I was raised believing that I was securely attached. And I'm going to tell y'all right now, like as I grew older, I realized that I really wasn't that securely attached. Like I really did suffer from a little bit of anxiety. And I didn't really understand how, like, why did I feel like I'd had anxious attachment if I had a two-parent household. You know, I had food, I had clothes, I never felt like I wasn't loved, right? But then as I got older, I started to realize that some of my behaviors when it came to friendships and just relationship, I realized that some of that stuff came from, and it showed that I did have some anxious attachment going on, mainly because of the fact that my parents did work. You know, they spent time outside the house. They wasn't as vocal with talking to us, or being emotionally connected with us. You know, of course we had discipline and different things like that. But when I think about the fact that if I did something wrong, like, it wasn't always like a conversation. It was more so you got in trouble. And so not really understanding how that impacted me as an adult until I became an adult. And understanding that that's why in some instances in my life, I felt like I had a little bit control, right? I had control issues. And so, you know, I definitely did not realize that I was borderline anxious attached, because I didn't really understand like that consistent of that the consistency of emotional attachment from my parents, right? I knew they loved me, but the way they showed me how they loved me was different than what I know now, being a secure attached child, if I was a secure attached child. So although I was safe, there was still parts of me that I did not feel safe sharing with my parents or saying, because I didn't know how they would either respond, or if something happened, I didn't know if I was going to get in trouble. So that was that inconsistency on certain things. So in certain situations in my life today, I still get a little anxious, but I'm working on that. But I will say that for the most part, I do think that I'm more secure than anxious, but I do know that there are parts of me that can be a little anxious. So anyone else think that they kind of know what they are, just from those little blurbs that I said about the attachment style? If not, it's okay. I'm going to keep going. So let's go back a little bit to attachment style for secure. So we know that secure attachment, fearful avoidant. Oh yeah, we didn't even get into that. And I didn't get into that because I wanted to try to keep it really, really close to just, you know, those styles. But the fearful avoidant is something that many people don't like to talk about. And so we're going to go back to that, Cindy. We'll go back to that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So secure attachment can communicate. These are people who could communicate clearly. They're comfortable with closeness and independence. So it's like they like to be independent, but they also like closeness, right? So that is where, like, I'm very independent, but I also like to be close to the people that I enjoy being around, right? I like to entertain. I like that one-to-one type of stuff, but you know, I like people, right? They don't panic when there's space. So for me, like, I never realized that it wasn't until I had a relationship where I felt like I was being deceived that I didn't that I felt panic when I was away from that person. However, prior to that, it wasn't. So that's another thing. Like, sometimes we can change by our by the things that happen to us as we grow as well. So, you know, that's another thing. Like with secure attachment, you don't worry about what other people are doing. You're pretty good with being alone, but you also like to be around others, right? So for an example, is my partner didn't text back yet, they're probably busy, I'll check in later. That is how someone who has a secure attachment would kind of respond, right? And we already know if it was something else, if it was anxious or avoidant, it'll be a different response, right? So then we have anxious attachment. We have overthinking, fear of abandonment, needs constant reassurance, and feels easily rejected. This is an example of when that person doesn't text you back. It's like, did I do something wrong? Are they losing interest? It's like you automatically go there, right? And this is when you don't have that consistency of love. You don't have that consistency of feeling like you're enough, or you're doing well at home, right? So when you're growing up and your mom and dad are always busy, they never have time to really talk to you, like sometimes they're right there, and then sometimes you can't find them, or sometimes they're really into you, but then next time they're not. It's like over as you get older, you don't really, it's so much inconsistency that as soon as you get it, you don't want to let it go. You got to keep on, want that person's attention. You got to make sure that they're spending that time with you. And that's how you can become anxious, because you never know when that person is going to come or leave. Also, anxious attachment can happen as a child if you lose a parent, right? If you're small and you lose a parent in an accident or an illness, that can also cause a little bit of anxiousness attachment when you're young and you lose a child. Lose a parent at a young age. And so some of the behaviors with that would be double texting, over explaining, emotional spiraling. So when you're not getting what it is that you need or hearing back from someone, you automatically go into this like rabbit hole, right? Or you get a text, you get an email from your employer and say, hey, I need to talk to you. Come see me when you're done. Automatically you start overthinking, right? That can be a sign that you have a little bit of anxious attachment, right? So that is what you want to pay attention to. Like if you do those things, then we need to work on where they come from. Why am I feeling this, and how did my childhood impact me now as an adult? And then we have avoidant attachment. So we have avoidant attachment. This is like struggling with emotional closeness. They pull away when things get deep and values independence over connection. So if somebody's getting too close to them, they need their space, right? Or ghosting somebody, or shutting down, or changing the subject when emotions come up. This is a person who literally just did not have any emotional connection growing up. It was kind of like they were independent their entire life. They didn't really have people really checking on them. They didn't really have people, paying attention to them, right? And then we also have a disorganized avoidant, which is wants love but fears it. These are people who really want to be loved, but they fear it because every time they felt like they were doing something good, or they had the attention of their caregiver, something bad would happen, right? Or they push pull behavior. So it's like you pull behavior, but then you push, you pull for the love, but then you push it away because you're like got a wall up. You just really don't know what to do. It's like confusion. And then you have inconsistent emotional responses. Again, all of these attachment styles can go in different ways, and they can really change too as you go through experiences. But I want to try to focus on how these things happen while you're a child and how they go into your adult experiences. So we want to make sure that we understand that attachment is how, I just want to go backwards. Attachment is how we connected with our caregivers. So if we had a close attachment with our caregivers, then more than likely we're going to have secure attachment, right? If you had a good relationship with your parents, if you talked to them, if they listened to you, if they did things with you, if that you had consequences that made sense, you're definitely going to have a secure attachment, right? Anxious attachment, not so much. This is attachment where, you really wasn't sure what you were going to get, right? You really wasn't sure what the outcomes was going to be. Or, you didn't have a caregiver. Maybe you were in adoption. You were in the adoption centers, right? Or maybe you were in foster care for a short period of time, or maybe your parents was on drugs or something like that, where they wasn't always there. These are different types of things that could possibly lead you into being anxious attached. And then you have the avoidant one. It might be like you were in your parents weren't there. Your parent might have been being abused, right? And really couldn't take care of you. Parent was always working, always stressed, didn't really have time to converse with you. You became very independent at a very young age. So therefore it's like, I don't want to get close because that makes me feel uncomfortable. My mother and father showed me they love me by working really hard, and they gave me tough love. That can cause people to become avoidant as well, right? because anything that feels mushy is uncomfortable, but anything that feels kind of like, yeah, you could do it by yourself or whatever, that's going to make you feel more comfortable. And that's how people, that's how people show you love, right? You know that they love you by what they do for you, but you can't do it for them. That makes sense, right? So some of the things that some of our children, and I know for me, I grew up sometime having this belief that sometime I wasn't good enough, right? Where did that come from? More than likely, it came from an experience that I had within my childhood. That has nothing to do with the attachment. That has everything to do with a core belief that for something that happened to me, right? So we know that core beliefs are things that happen. So either we were bullied, we had some type of trauma, we had something that happened in our lives when we were younger that it was like a constant type of thing that traumatized us. And what we end up doing is we go from that incident, then we go into making rules around that incident. So if these things ever happen again, I'm going to do this. And then those rules become habits. So now you're a procrastinator. Now you have control issues. Now you want to do everything on your own. Now you feel like you're not enough. So you're going to always make sure that you do everything better and more extravagant, right? Because that is a core belief from your trauma when you were a child. You felt like you were bullied. You felt like you were abused. So now it's like, as I get older, I'm going to do everything myself. Nobody can be trusted. And that's how those core beliefs start popping up. So we have negative core beliefs for the most part when you have negative things happening in your life. So for me, I know that when through my abuse, I felt that I was only worth like my looks or my body, right? For a long time until I was able to get the healing that I needed. And so after a while, I started to realize where that came from, right? And so I had to rewire that core belief of who I was because of that trauma that happened to me, right? And so when I was sexually assaulted in college, I also had to realize that I was more than that, but it took time. But that was something that I brought into my young adulthood. And so that was a core belief that I thought, because that also went on to a trauma. So now I went from this trauma having a rule to the core belief of I am only worth my body, right? If my body isn't right, then I'm not good. And sometimes we have these beliefs and we start using things to kind of like make us feel like we're important, or we're, that's why some people have core beliefs about titles, right? Well, I need to be the president because if I'm the president, then I'm looked at as positive. Why is that important? Because when I was in third grade, I used to get bullied because I didn't know my multiplication facts, right? Or I used to get bullied because I didn't have the name brand clothes, right? So now as I get older, I have decided that I'm going to overwork. I'm going to do everything I need to do so I can have a title. So if I have the title, I have the power, right? So that you can see that in police officers who hold power. You can see that in people with high positions, and if you go back into their childhood, you realize that they went through some stuff. And so what they've done is they allowed the trauma to go into a rule for themselves, which now becomes a habit. And that habit has now become, I'm going to do whatever I want to do because I have the power. I didn't have any power back then, but I have the power now, right? So then we also have people that always leave. Like if you think about individuals who have a core belief that I'm going to just leave instead of dealing with it, that's a sense of avoidant, right? A lot of times what ends up happening is that if you are traumatized enough, the only time you feel safe is if you remove yourself from it, right? And you start doing things on your own. So after a certain while, after a little bit of time, you realize that I'm the only one I could depend on. Every time I was in a bad space, nobody was there for me. So now as an adult, you start moving like you're the only one that you can depend on. You don't ask for help. You're always overwhelmed. You're always overworked. So now your lifestyle is so convoluted and so you got so many things going on in your life that you don't have time for yourself, your family. You know, if you do have a loved one, like a spouse or something, it's probably very chaotic, toxic. If you don't have them, you probably like, I don't want any kids. You get a dog, so you don't got to really spend any time with that person or that thing, right? So we want to make sure that when we think about the things that we've gone through as children, as young people, or as, you know, the relationship that we have with our parents, we have to make sure that we pay attention to how we're bringing that into our adulthood. How are we behaving as adults? Some of us have very, very horrible like just thought processes as adults. Why? Because we had really, really traumatized childhood experiences. We had childhood experiences that was not something that we're excited about, right? So even as a mother of two daughters, right? When I had my first daughter, I was a teen mom, and when I wanted to make sure she always had what she needed, but I wasn't there emotionally. I know that. I know that I was not there as emotionally as I am now, right? And as I got older. But a lot of that is because the way I was raised is how I was trying to raise my child, you know, through discipline, you know, yelling, you know, a pop, or, you know, whatever, or, you know, threatening, you know. So sometimes we learn these behaviors by the way that we were raised, and then we bring them into how we raise our children. How many of us do that? How many of us have done that, right? We have to pay attention to that. The way that we're raised, sometimes we bring it into our adulthood on how we raise our own children or how we behave in situations as an adult. When I think about the fact that as a young mom, right, having my first daughter, my second daughter, I was a little bit more educated. I was trying to rewire myself with not arguing or not yelling, without doing certain things. It was uncomfortable, but I started to realize that due to my own trauma, I had been taking that out on my older daughter, and I realized that it wasn't healthy for her, so I had to change it. But not everybody as an adult can see those things. Some people would just say, well, I'm good. And people will really feel like they're okay and they don't have to change, even though everyone around them is showing them that their behavior isn't healthy. No one's willing to go backwards and say, where am I getting this behavior from? Or why do I do what I do? People don't like to ask those questions for themselves, especially when they feel like they're not wrong, right? Or they feel like, well, this is working for me. And so they don't want to ask the questions, why am I being rude? Or why am I not listening to my child? Or why am I not able to have good communication with my partner? If we take time and go backwards to how we were raised and the things that we saw or we heard when we were growing up, or the things that we were missing, then we can start seeing how these things have impacted our lives as adults. If you're an overachiever, more than likely you didn't have any, like, no one paid you any attention, right? A lot of times that's what it is. Sometimes it's because you have been abused. So the only way that you didn't get abused is if you just made sure everything was done, right? Or, like I said, the abuse could have been that, or it could have been the fact that someone hurt you. And so you feel like, I have to make sure I have control over everything so no one hurts me. And so as an adult, you bring that same type of nonsense into your life, right? And then we also think about, when you think about from growing up in spaces where, you know, maybe your voice isn't heard, or growing up in a space where maybe there's a lot of children. And so it's not that your parents didn't want to give you attention, but it was just like they were overwhelmed by the amount of children that they had, that their way of showing love was very minimal. And so as you grow older, you realize that you're showing people minimal of love, and then if they say something to you, you get upset. And sometimes you got to stop and think, why do I feel like it's okay to give people a little bit of my love if they're telling me that they need more? You got to think about, why are you doing that? And a lot of times that's because you need to go backwards and understand where that behavior comes from. Any questions? It's been quiet over here. All right. So, have you learned how to love yourself even through your childhood adversities? How many of you have learned how to love yourself through your childhood adversities? I have. And a lot of that came from me first identifying some of the things that I have gone through that I needed to heal from. And, you know, once you're able to do that, then you can actually start seeing your faults. And so for me, I had to start seeing my faults. I had to start seeing what was actually causing me to behave the way that I was behaving. And in order for me to do that, I had to be intentional. I had to be intentional about how the things that impacted me as a child was now impacting my adult life. And I realized that I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to hurt myself anymore. So I had to dig deep to find out what was the problems. And a lot of times those problems came deep rooted from things that I had repressed, things that had happened to me that I felt like, oh, well, I'm just gonna keep it down and don't think about it, and I'm gonna be okay. And it's not gonna ever come up. But I lied. I was lying to myself, right? So I would like to ask you guys some questions. So one would be, what is something from your childhood that you once normalized but now realize may have impacted you? Does anybody have anything that they would like to share? Well, I would like to say that one of the things that I normalized as in my childhood that now I realize that is not something that everybody does is that I felt like when family gets together, everybody needs to be there. And I felt like when people didn't show up, that mean that they didn't love me or they didn't care. But that wasn't always true, right? So that was something that I felt like it was normalized. Like, you supposed to come. That's how you show you love somebody. Ty says, saying I love you. Yeah. I mean, but who wouldn't normalize that? And how could that impact a little person not hearing I love you, right? Or feeling like, do they love me, or what does that mean? Because if you don't always hear that word or that those three words, I love you, when someone else says it to you as you grow up, it's like, that's weird. Like, what you love? So now you questioning it. What do you love? Like, what do you mean you love me? Because you're not used to hearing that. So that's a good one. Or on the flip side, is somebody telling you they love you made you feel special, but there was no action behind it. So you was constantly falling in love with people once they said they loved you, but realizing that love is an action word. And so you were around people that constantly said they loved you, but they didn't show you love. So you thought, well, that's what it is. You know, somebody tell you love them, you got to take their word. But in reality, it's action behind that word or those words. Another question is, when you're triggered today, do you respond as your adult self, or do you react as out of your childhood pain? That's a really good question. I know many of us may not want to agree or want to even acknowledge that sometimes we do not respond as an adult. We respond to things as that little child that just got triggered. I know for me, I've done that before, where it's like someone did something to me, and if I didn't heal from it, I was definitely responding as that little girl. 100%. Ty said, it depends on what the situation is. Yeah. So do you have an example of like something happened in your life and, like, can you like elaborate on that? Cindy said, depends on my current emotions. That's also true. Because depending on what you're going through, someone can trigger you and can trigger that little girl, little boy in you. Or sometimes you could be in a good space and you will respond as an adult. But even sometimes, even when you're in a good space, that little person still comes out. So we have to be mindful of that. I know there are times where if someone does something to me that is very like sexually inappropriate, that little girl might come out, right? Because that was something that, although it took some time for me to get there were certain things that I was like, okay, yeah, I responded in a negative way. What patterns keep showing up in your relationships, and where do you think they started? Anybody want to try to do that? Anybody want to be a little bit vulnerable or a little bit like open and say something? Really give an example of like some of the patterns that you keep showing in relationships. I would say for me, it would be argumentative. I'm doing much better. I'm learning how to just say, okay, I'm learning to let things go. I'm learning to give people space without always trying to get an understanding of what they're saying, because sometimes it's not worth it. And so that is a pattern of mine. I always want to always understand. And I think that comes from me feeling like I wasn't always heard at home, right? Or heard at school, not just at home, but at school as well. So depending on, depending on what it was, I found myself having to explain myself or wanting to get my voice heard. But over time, I've learned that that's not important. That's not important. So that is a pattern that I did notice that keeps coming up in relationships, right? And not just intimate relationships, but just in relationships alone. So now I'm learning how to just be like, you know what? You're not paying attention. You don't care, or, you don't understand what I'm saying. We may not agree, but it's not worth keep going back and forth. If once our emotions might go down a little bit, or we got time to process it in more of a mature manner, maybe I'll bring it back up. But sometimes God will tell you, no, don't say nothing. I just had an incident last week and I was going to bring it up. And God said, no, like it's not worth it. But it came from me feeling like I was being taken advantage of. And that's something that happened to me as a child. I was taken advantage of. So therefore, I felt like I needed to express something. But you don't always have to do that just because you feel that way. And so that was a pattern of, being taken advantage of. So you always feel like you have to explain, or you got to get answers. What did you need as a child that you didn't receive, and how is it showing up in your life today? I don't know. I can't really say that I needed a whole lot other than maybe just being able to communicate with my parents a little bit better. I think I had a really decent childhood, to be honest. I didn't really want for anything. We had a pretty good life. Consistency, Cindy said. Yes, consistency is huge. Consistency is huge for a child. And that's one of the things too, like I found out too in my own life with my kids. It's like, if you tell them that you're going to do something, do it. Right? Don't tell a child that you're going to do something and don't do it. And that's like one of the worst things you can do for a kid, because that will definitely make them feel like they have to depend on themselves, or they become anxious, because they are little people. They are trusting your word. So when you are not being honest about what you're going to do, and you're not being consistent about what you're going to do, then you're going to make a problem for that young person as they grow older if they don't get the help that they need. On the other end, consistency can also mean you are consistent with hurting them. You are consistent with not doing what you said. And so as a young kid growing, you get so used to people not showing up for you or not doing what they say, so therefore you become very dependent on self, right? Or when you do find people that you feel like you start overcompensating. So sometimes that consistency could be a good thing, but it also can be a negative thing. Okay, so thank you, Cindy, for that. So in your inner child voice, could you speak right now? What would you say? And do they still need you? Would you, if you had an opportunity to speak to your inner child, that little girl, that little boy that's in you today, what do you think that you would need to say? Or do you think that they need you today? Do you even think about that? Sometimes we don't even take time to think about that. We don't even pay attention to the fact that they're like that little girl, that little boy within us may really need us. And the big part, they may need us to let them go and to keep them safe and say, I got you. But how do you do that? More than likely, therapy. If you've had a very, very traumatic childhood, or you've had a lot of things going on in your childhood, you might want to go to therapy so that you're not carrying these little girl and little boy behaviors around as an adult. You're not arguing with everybody. You're not thinking that everybody's attacking you. You're not thinking that you need to be in charge in order for you to have a voice. You know, you're not overdoing. You're not overcompensating. You're not always scared. When you finally find or protect the little person that's in you, you can start living a happier adult life. You just can. Because what ends up happening is if you don't heal the little person within you from all the pain that they've endured, you will grow up as an broken adult, an adult that's maybe entitled, an adult that uses their power to hurt others because they never got healed from being hurt. You know, you end up being someone who don't care, someone who's selfish, someone who's inconsistent. Because when you were little, everyone around you was inconsistent. You can't have fun because every time someone says something to you that made you feel like they were putting you down, you took that as a negative instead of just taking it as fun, because that little boy or little girl in you was so used to people putting you down that all you do now is act like no one can ever mess with you. Like, no, I don't play those games. Play what games? I'm just having fun. We also got to understand that faith and healing is a bridge, right? So if you are using your faith with healing, it's a bridge to healing, right? So we know that I'm a faith-based therapist, right? And I definitely like to use scripture, and I talk about God to help people use also like work with their psychological issues. So Psalms 34:18 says, God is close to the brokenhearted. Why is he close to the brokenhearted? Because he wants us to release that to him. It says Matthew 18, become like children. Although I'm telling you today, like, we need to heal the inner peace, but sometimes that inner peace, it has to be like, let that child know that they're safe. God is consistent to us. And that's what that little girl, little boy needs to know, that we are consistent with protecting them so they can relax. They don't have to keep coming out every time something happens. And when we find ourselves that way, go to God, because he is always going to be consistent with us. Isaiah 61 also talks about healing the brokenhearted. God wants to heal us. He wants us to be healed. The things that we've gone through as children should not make us mean, pushovers, or anything. It should give us wisdom to learn how to love each other better, to learn what to do and what not to do, not to hold grudges. We are not supposed to grow up with so much hate or dysfunction. It's really supposed to help us become the men and women that we're supposed to become, the way that God needs us to become. So yes, we have attachment styles. Yes, we have core beliefs. Yes, we have anger issues at times. But God is saying, come back to me. Lay everything to me. I'm going to help you heal through everything. We know that when you're dealing with the inner child, we know that your adult reactions often is basically the inner child wanting to be seen, heard, or healed. Sometimes when you're saying when you're with someone and they're always arguing or yelling, or they all there's just always an issue, more than likely just sometimes you just got to stop and say, okay, what is it that you need from me? Because that might be their inner child coming out and they finally open up. Don't look at it as a mean thing. Don't look at it as like, I'm gonna keep going against you. No, sometimes you got to stop and say, what is it that he or she needs? And he or she might just need somebody to listen to them. The goal for this stream today was really to help us understand that we have to heal our inner children. We have to understand what that looks like and how it builds us into the man or woman that we are today. And sometimes we get so stuck with the fact that our children are becoming something different than who we are. And the thing is, they're supposed to. They're supposed to become different. They're supposed to become something more like exquisite, right? Doesn't make them better than you. It just means that you're learning how to communicate with them and do the things for them that you did not receive. So I'm hoping that this helps. I'm hoping that this helps with you guys today, because I'm noticing that there's a lot of people out here in this world, adults, who, when I see how they behave, I automatically see them as children. And I automatically can just imagine the amount of trauma and the things that they've gone through, right? The rejection, the bullying, sexual abuse, the verbal abuse. I start to see these things when I'm looking at some of these people on how people respond and how they deal with anger and emotion. We can have healthy emotions, and then we can have dysregulated emotions. And those dysregulated emotions are literally from the fact that you have not learned how to control the pain that's inside. Because we all have some type of pain. But how do we deal with them? How do we push through them? We have to push through them by saying, okay, what is it that I need to work on? Why do I always act like this when this happens? Why am I always yelling? Why do I feel like I gotta cuss every time I got something to say? Right? Like, why do I always gotta be in charge? Why is it so important for me to have a title when I'm already doing the work? Right? Some people might say, oh, it's the finances, but sometimes it's not that. Sometimes people just want a title because they feel like that's going to give them power, or they feel like that makes them feel like they're finally being seen. I am the president of X, Y, and Z. Even if you're the only one, the fact that you walk out the house and say, I'm the president of this company, it's your company. But because you are so like, you just need to have some type of attention. You want to use that term because that title means something to someone, right? Or let's just say, like, you were asked to be the leader of something or the lead. And so everyone else is trying to give you feedback. But if you don't like it, you just like, no. And then you go for something that you want and you want only. And now you don't hurt everybody else, or you don't piss everybody off. So now you go right back to that little girl, little boy, who you finally got the control, but you don't have nothing else. We have to be able to identify these things, and so we can start healing from these things. We have to start healing from our past. We have to make sure that when we start healing from our past, we take time not to then hurt others as adults. Make sense? I hope it makes sense. Do you guys know anyone who shuts down often when you're talking with them? I was thinking if you guys have any questions about certain people that you might have in your life that you're struggling with understanding, and maybe we can kind of chat about it. We got a little bit of time tonight. You might, have someone who you're struggling with right now that you might want a little bit of feedback. I'm here. So let's talk a little bit about that if you want. I guess not. Well, guys, I know that tonight has been kind of quiet, but I will say that although we are adults, we sometimes have to still remember a lot of the things that we've gone through as children, we still carry as adults. A lot of our selfishness, a lot of our doubt, a lot of our rejection that we might have felt, any trauma that we've experienced. And I want you guys to really pay attention to that over the next couple of days, over the next couple of months. Like when certain things come out, I want you to really stop for a moment and process it and say to yourselves, like, is this something that I need to work through due to the fact that I've never worked through it as a child, or is this something new? Because although we're talking about childhood experiences versus adult experiences, some of our experiences are not always from our childhood. It can be from relationships that we've had that constantly keeps happening to us, right? And then that turns into experiences in adulthood that we do. I really feel like we have to do better with acknowledging the things that we haven't healed from as children and how we bring that into our adulthood. And I don't think a lot of people really deal with that or really acknowledge that they have a lot of stuff that's deep down in them that they're just been sitting on their hearts and on their spirits as young people for so long, and now they're 40, 50, 60 years old still behaving like that child. But then say somebody else is acting like a child. But I will say that every time I find myself connecting with little Tasha, I go straight to God. Like, God, release, like, whatever that event that happened that brought this out, that hurt me, please help me forgive myself, forgive that person, and release it. Because when I tell you, I don't like to see man children or women children. I like to see men and women growing, engaging, So when I see these man child or women child, like these people, the banter that's just not healthy as adults, I'm like, wow, like, why can't they just take a moment and start healing from what broke them as children or the things that they didn't receive as a child? Why don't they just really come and talk through it? I really don't understand why that's so hard for people to acknowledge the fact that you still got some healing. I am a doctor. I have years of training, and I still know that there are things within me that's deep down that sometimes come out. And I have to acknowledge it and say, no, that's not okay. And I'm still working on it. I talked to my sister about these things. I talked to my friends about these things. I was just having a conversation with my cousin last week. Like, there are things that I'm like, I am embarrassed that I still do that. Or I made that person feel that way due to my own stuff. So that's why journaling is so important, because while you're journaling, things will pop up. And you're like, oh, shoot, like, I didn't know I was still carrying that. Then you think, I gotta go and apologize to Mark. I gotta go and apologize to Sylvia. Or I need to have a conversation with my mother, or I need to have a conversation with my dad, right? Because sometimes we don't even realize we're holding on to childhood traumas and it's coming into our adulthood. We don't even realize that, not thinking you're enough. And then you got like 12 relationships that all failed, but you blaming everybody else. And you're not realizing that could be connected to your childhood experiences. Therapy was scary in the beginning. Thankful I am still in therapy. I want to be healed wholeheartedly. Amen. That was Tina. Yes, I agree. Like, when you start healing, when you actually get a therapist that you really enjoy and they're actually helping you kind of dig through that stuff, it's the most like freeing experience. I enjoy seeing my therapist every month. I enjoy it. Why? Because it allows me to be free, and anything that is there that I need to be held accountable, she's going to help me bring it out without making me feel bad about it, but help me to understand why I must release things. And that is good, because sometimes when we're going through therapy, we're very uncomfortable. We're very uncomfortable because now we got to change what's been normalized, right? So even as a child, it was normal to behave mean and be petty and argumentative and all these things because you wanted to protect yourself. But as an adult, we don't need to do that. So when you get into therapy and your therapist is telling you like your behavior is not okay, and they're telling you different ways to deal with it, it's going to feel uncomfortable. Because it's like, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've been doing this for 50 years. So what? Try it a different way, and then you tell me how you feel. Right? So that is exactly why I, as a therapist, wanted to do this type of conversation, because I know that it will help somebody go into therapy, but also help people to understand that everybody goes through something. It is this, like, therapy is wisdom building, to be honest. That's how I look at it. You are building wisdom. And if you take time and allow yourself to grow from the things that you thought would have killed you, you would be in so much better space. And that's why I wanted to do this podcast, because I feel like the more people are aware that there are things out here that the devil has made to kill us, but because we are strong within the Lord, we are here and we can help others. And so I'm on my task from God to do these things. So every week, I'm always trying to find, something to talk about, and God always gives me a little nugget. And so I'm thankful that you guys come out and come on, and I hope that you guys can share, tell more people about us, about me. That would be great. I'm looking forward to just all the things that I'm able to like share, and then I'm able to receive from you guys, because even with your responses and you guys just being here for me, I am like super, super excited. And so I appreciate it. I really do. Oh, and before I leave, I wanted to just get back to Cindy when you talked about fearful avoidant. If no one knows what fearful avoidant is, it's really like wanting to have this intense desire of intimacy, but because you've been betrayed so much or someone hurt you in such a bad way, you kind of like push away from it. And that comes from that real like it's like from childhood trauma from like your caregiver for it was like something that was like really really brutal. It could be like sexual abuse or physical abuse, but you want that intimacy, you want to be loved by that person, but they kept hurting you. And that's where a lot of that fearful avoidant attachment comes from. So I want to just get back to you, Cindy. I didn't want to leave the chat without like really just putting that out there. So when you're going through these types of moments where you're thinking about your attachment style, please remember that you are not broken. You are not broken. Just because there's an attachment style does not mean it can't change. All of our attachment styles can change. That's why at one point I thought I was very secure. And then as I grew a little older, I realized I had a little bit of anxious attachment due to relational problems. It wasn't always from that, right? So just really, really understand that every week I want to come to talk about things that are personal to each of us, not just one person, but to each of us that somebody can get something from. So I hope that you guys have a wonderful week. It's your girl, Dr. Tasha Rose, your transparent sister in women's healing. And I want you to know that I love you and God loves you too. Peace.